In this session, I want to dig into the four pillars of composition that we talked about in the introductory section. All right, simplicity, asymmetry, eye lines, and point of view are our four pillars. And in this particular movie, I want to talk exclusively about simplicity. And we're going to break simplicity down into four different components. And it's really important to kind of consider these in order, one right after another in sequence, when you're composing your image. First, you want to consider the number of image elements and keep them less than or equal to 4. Then you want to look at the internal complexity of each of those image elements. And then at the separation. And then finally, ask yourself, is there a primary visual element? Let's do this. This is one of my portfolio images I consider to be very successful. It sells very well. Lots of people like it, and there's a reason why. One, it's very simple. There's only two components, right? The background and the tree. So that definitely satisfies the less than or equal to 4. Internal complexity. Background is flat black. The tree has a lot of detail, but because the detail is very visible, it's not complex. And that's the difference. You can have lots of detail so long as it's complex. We'll see some images where that's not true. Separation, great separation between the beautiful white tree in the background. And obviously, there's a primary visual element. So this is a fairly easy image, a simple image to critique. Let's move on and look at some others. This is one of the images we looked at in the first presentation. This is that powerful Kodiak wave. And we look at why this image is successful. And let's break it down into these four components. One, two, three elements. Internal complexity, they're all internally simple. Detail is visible, but it's all very visible and distinguishable. Well-separated image components. A wave from the mountain, from the sky. Primary visual element, absolutely, is the wave. And that's why this image is successful. So you have 3 to 4 well-separated elements and good eye lines, which we'll talk about later, and a nice primary element. And then this image, another portfolio image, this is my texture and fabric images. When we look at the 4 characteristics here and compare them, we have 2 primary image elements, right? The internal complexity of both are fairly simple. Remember, lots of detail, but so long as the detail is visible, that's the key. It's when detail becomes invisible or muddy that it adds complexity to an image. Obviously, the legs are well separated from the background, and the sea star legs are the primary image element. So we have 2 very well separated elements with some beautiful eye lines, which we'll discuss later, and a very obvious primary image element. And this, what I call ice dancing, another one of my portfolio images. This has 2 or 3 elements, depending upon how you count them. The floating glacial icebergs, the lake, and then the background forest. The internal complexity of each is low, particularly the foreground. Lots of detail back here, but again, it's all very easily distinguishable. Is the separation good? You betcha. Beautiful separation between the icebergs and the lake, and between the icebergs and the background sky. And primary image element in spades, right? It's the foreground well-lit icebergs. So here we've got great separation between the icebergs and the water. And let me tell you, just one little nuance here, very, very important for the success of this image. It's very subtle, but very important, is the separation here between the iceberg and the reflections. All right, I had to make very, very sure that there was separation there, because without that, the separation of the image elements does not occur and the complexity of the entire image goes up. And it would no longer be a portfolio image as far as I'm concerned. So sometimes very subtle differences like that very simple separation there become very important. Let's take a look at some other images. We've got a color image with 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. All right, and all of them are very simple. The silhouette, the water, a little bit of foreground here with the shore, and then, of course, the sky. All right, they're all well separated from each other, and there's a primary visual element that we see here. So 3 to 4 well-separated elements with good eye lines and a nice primary image element. Now, this is more of a snapshot, right? We've been talking about, more art images, very high-quality images. But whether you're taking images for your gallery presentation or for your Facebook page, good composition is important. And here with this snapshot, this meets the criteria for a good quality image, right? There's 1, 2, and maybe we consider the reflection as a third element. But even if we do, it's still less than 4 image elements. The internal complexity of each of these elements is not high, right? There's really good color separation between these elements. And there's a primary image element, which is Zip and me and our reflection. So regardless of what the use of the image is, good composition is good composition. And I wanted to show you this image because this is another portfolio image that is one of the probably the most complex images I have in my portfolio. And I call this turn, turn, turn because of the three birds. And as we'll talk about later in the course, this image took me almost 6 months to capture. And there is a lot going on in this image, but it's still successful. It makes it into the portfolio because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. You can count the birds as 5 if you want to. But the real key to making this image work is the separation between all these elements. You can get by with more complexity in an image if you make sure that the internal complexity of each of the elements, the detail is very visible, and there's great separation between all of the image elements. And indeed, there is a primary image element, which is the foreground wave. All right, let's now compare some images and why one is more successful than the other. Let's compare this, the snow sculpture, with an image shot in a similar area and see why the right-hand one makes it into the portfolio and the left-hand one does not. We've already talked about the characteristics of this and why it works. Let's talk about this and why it doesn't quite so much. Not a horrible image, but notice that the internal complexity is very high, right? There's lots of overlapping trees, and that increases the complexity of this image. And that's one of the key reasons why this image doesn't make it into my portfolio. I also wanted to mention, as you see down here in the bottom, there's a mismatch in the orientation. Here, the vertical format of the image matches the vertical format of the key element. And here, the horizontal format competes with the vertical. Let's take a look at these two related images. They're both trees, and I actually like both of these images. But the reason why this one is less successful is the bottom half of the image. Notice the top half has very few elements. There's detail, but the complexity is visible. There's great separation between the trees and the skies. So everything's great in the top half. It's the bottom half where the problem is. This is where the complexity increases. There's lack of separation. And there's muddiness as far as the detail is concerned. That's why overall this is a better image than this one, although I love the top half. And when we compare these two images, top one more successful than the bottom one. This has 4 elements in it, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is the snow, where you could count it 3 or 4 elements. This has multiple elements in it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But more importantly, where this has good separation throughout, and any detail that's here is very visible, this middle ground in this image really is too muddy. The detail is not very obvious, and the separation is not good. That's why this is a portfolio image and this one is not. And again, when we do this comparison between these two images, right-hand image, very simple, 1, 2, 3 elements. Good separation between all of them. This is not a portfolio image because it really lacks a central focus, but it's a well-composed image. Image on the left-hand side, top half again is good. Good simple composition up here, good asymmetry, good separation, but it's the foreground where there's lack of separation and too much going on and the detail is not very obvious. So you can see using these techniques, we can really critique these images and figure out the good parts, the bad parts, and then, repeat the good parts as we move forward. Compare these two images, 1, 2, 3 elements. They're all well separated from each other. In this particular case, too many elements and the foreground is very, very complex. Lack of separation, the detail is too muddied. So we can very clearly see the difference between these two images. These images, which were shot very similar to each other, in fact, it's the same plant, but I like the right-hand image. Why? Because it's simpler. It captures the essence of what this is. There's only 2 elements here. And notice in this particular image, this is interesting up top here, but do you see how the background complexity here muddies the overall composition of the image because of lack of separation and too much internal complexity? We compare these 2 similar images. Which one do you think is the better composition? I would choose the right-hand one, and I bet you would as well. And the reason is because of the separation that we have here. This concept of separation can be so important. Here, this complexity where we have intersecting high contrast edges creates complexity which is distracting, where here each of the image elements is well separated from each other. And in this image, this is Marathon Mountain in Seward, Alaska. And this is actually images that I shot showing the Marathon Mountain hill climb. Left-hand image is not as successful as the right. And a couple of things here, but the most important is look at the separation of these runners. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 elements, and maybe the runners are number 5. Maybe they're just add-ons. But the key here is well-separated runners. Every one of these is easily distinguishable. Where here, do you see they're all bunched up together, creates visual complexity. You'll see I also simplified the image by making it black and white. More discussion on that later. So here the separation again becomes very, very important. So for simplicity, 4 components, fewer number of elements, less than or equal to 4. Look at the internal complexity, keep it low. Make sure all the image elements are well separated, and make sure there's one primary visual element in the image.